Just a little word on Tyler Adams, because listeners of this podcast know I'm a massive fan of Tyler Adams now. You will have seen much more of him than I have, but I've been pushing him to at least become a squad player for Newcastle United should they be in the Champions League. We know they're going to have to, cut their cloth accordingly. Could he do a job in a top four side?
I can't believe Tyler Adams will be a squad player. I mean, that does just say it all where Newcastle are going now, and that arguably what would have been Leeds' player of the year becomes a squad player for Newcastle. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's been fantastic. I'm pleased you've said it with the little you've seen of him, because obviously we've seen him every week, and he's been amazing. Honestly, really, really good. And without him, it would have been even worse this season. And his hamstring injury, which occurred just during the last international break, I mean, that will go down as one of the moments. If they do go down, that'll be one of the killer moments when they lost him, because he just got through so much work. And in this day and age where it's all about attacking players and attacking flair, we know since the days of Makelele and obviously Kante more recently, that has become such an important position to every successful football team. You look at Rodri at City; he's become an absolute indomitable force in the middle of the pitch. So absolutely, if Leeds go down, Adams is absolutely a candidate, I would think, that is going to get gobbled up by a top 6 or top 8 team looking for, because there isn't a massive pool of players, is there, in that position that have now been tested. I mean, that's the thing with Adams that he's got over other European targets, is he's had that season in the Prem, and teams will have seen him do that role very, very well in a team that's under fire. So if he goes into a team that has less pressure on it and he has more time to carry out that job, absolutely he could do a job at that level. And I think the more realistic spectators from a Leeds point of view would see him as a big target if Leeds do go down. Of course, we'd love him to stay, and he'd be incredible in the Championship after only one season. But I think if we're realistic, some clubs will come in and offer very, very generous money for him. So yeah, I think he'd be a tremendous player for a top 4, top 6 team.
That said, is that one of the biggest frustrations you think of Leeds fans should they go down? Obviously, going down is horrendous in itself, but when you look at the kind of the spine they've got there, the likes of Tyler Adams, if McKennie ended up signing permanently, Rodrigo is another one, Harrison on the left, Nonto. There were a good group of kind of players who could become the core, and obviously you'd still need to be spending money and building to become a force in the Premier League. But like I say, if Leeds go down, you can't see any of those players that I've named there probably staying, because they'll all have suitors.
Yeah, I think this probably just comes with the realization and the acceptance of relegation. I think we've all watched football long enough to know it's just what happens, and we don't live in this dream world where you can go down and keep all your players without facing very, very serious financial problems if you don't immediately come back up, and face quite a few restless players who will be quite disenfranchised playing in that division for a season. So I think I can understand the point you're making, but I think given the last 2 seasons have been difficult, the reason for that is a lot of those players have underperformed over a long period. You might get pockets of form. For instance, Harrison, very recently doing very, very well. Every transfer window, especially before he signed his new contract, was popping up, because we know English players carry a premium. And if you get a hard-working, honest player who never kicks up a stink about anything and never gets injured, that's why Harrison is always going to get linked, because he can be that tricky wide player. But if you watch him week in, week out, he's very, very frustrating to watch. And the end product has not been there for 60, 70% of the last 2 years. And yes, he pops up with important goals, scored a goal at Brentford on the last day of last season to keep them up, scored very, very important goals recently that have given Leeds a chance. But Rodrigo, for instance, been solid this season, certainly at the best of his 3 years. But for a record signing, done nowhere near enough across 3 years. So yes, I see your point, and there is a spine there, which from afar maybe looks quite promising. But I think given that the last 2 years have been difficult, there is probably, as long as they got the right price for them, I think there are quite a few there that Leeds fans will be happy to at least see move on and to remold this squad in some way. So I see your point. But I think if you go down, you go down for a reason, because those players have underperformed.
It's quite interesting to see that, because Harrison's one of those names that's been consistently linked to Newcastle.
Yeah.
It'll probably crop up again in the summer, regardless of what division Leeds are in. And so it's interesting to get the actual insight of someone who watches them week in, week out, to say, yeah, look, he has good games, but as a whole, he's not.
He could be one of those that kind of explodes in a better team, Andrew. I mean, we've all seen a lot of players who really do their best, but can only do so much in certain teams. But, what I would say about Harrison is he has got the tools to be a very, very good winger. And if it does click, as it has done on occasion, as I've alluded to, he could be a very, very good winger, and not far from the England squad. I mean, I think last year he got 8 goals and 8 assists, which I think was more goal involvements than the likes of Jack Grealish. So I don't think he's got close to the England squad, but I know Southgate has watched him and he's mentioned him in dispatches sort of off the record, and we understand he's been not far from sort of the long lists for England. So if it clicks for players like Harrison, I can see why a manager like Howe would back himself to mould him into an elite winger. So I do get it. But when you watch them week in, week out in what is a team that has struggled for 2 years, they all play their part in that team being inconsistent.